Good evening. Calling to order the school committee meeting of August 20th, 2024. We'll all rise and salute the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo?
Here.
Mr. Caggiano?
Here.
Mr. Kingston?
Here.
Mrs. Milbury Ellis?
Present.
Miss Monterosso?
Present.
Mr. Sinella?
Present.
Mayor Keefe?
Here. We have recognition. None? Okay. Then we have the consent calendar.
Motion to approve the consent calendar?
Second.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo?
Yes.
Mr. Caggiano?
Yes.
Mr. Kingston?
Yes.
Mrs. Milbury Ellis?
Yes.
Miss Monterosso?
Yes.
Mr. Sinella?
Yes.
Mayor Keefe?
Yes. No student representative report. We have, this moment in time, we have public speak. This time, anyone wishing to public speak in the audience? Hearing and seeing none, and anyone on our,
There's no one in the Zoom, no.
okay. No one wishes to public speak. We're going to close that end of the hearing.
Yeah, motion to close public speak?
Give it a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 3 items on the superintendent report, and the first one is a presentation from our legal counsel, Jennifer King, who I have to say did a phenomenal 1-hour presentation to administrators this morning at our meeting. She's going to do a much briefer presentation for the school committee, about 5 to 10 minutes, just to give you an overview of the differences between what Title IX was like before and what it is now under the new regulations. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank you to the school committee for having me this evening. If you bear with me a moment, I do have some slides prepared to go over some of the changes, and I am happy to address any and all questions that any committee members may have about the changes. So looks like I'm not able to share my screen. I can walk through everything verbally if that's preferable.
I'm trying to figure out how to give you that permission. Can you try one more time? I think I may have just done it.
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to go through some of these changes. I will certainly stick around at the end. We just have 3 slides to answer questions, but if anything pops up as I'm going through, just because I can't see everybody in the room, Diane, if you could just let me know if somebody in the committee has a question, I'm happy to address that.
Will do.
So sort of to start, one thing to sort of know, so Title IX is a federal law. It went into place over 50 years ago. It's only 36 words, and it bans sex discrimination in any educational institution that receives federal funding. Previously, the Department of Education, which enforces Title IX and changes the regulations time to time, had a very narrow definition of conduct that the district was required to investigate under its policies and procedures pursuant to Title IX. So again, before, a very narrow definition of sexual harassment, looking at hostile environments, things of that nature. Now, Title IX has changed to really encompass the actual definition of sex-based discrimination. The Department of Education in those regulations is now interpreting and including sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, and pregnancy as falling under the umbrella of sex discrimination. Previously, the district had already been obligated to address any such complaints under these protected classes by way of Massachusetts law and regulations. So it isn't changing anything, that we still have a responsibility to investigate and address those matters. Rather, now it falls under Title IX in that process. So what that is really doing, and it sort of gets to the next piece here, is that is increasing responsibilities for Title IX coordinators. Those were previously, those types of investigations were able to be dealt with at building levels by assistant principals and principals. So what we are seeing as a result is many districts are appointing multiple Title IX coordinators to make sure that we are able to timely respond to any complaints that come in. And additionally, some districts are even hiring or have full-time Title IX coordinators. And that actually gets to the next piece, which speaks to sort of coordinators and the other roles in the investigative process. So in the old regulations, there were sort of a separation of the three main roles in the process. You have your Title IX coordinator, who coordinates the entire investigation, an investigator who gathers information and interviews parties, and a decision maker to determine violations of any policies. Beforehand, those all had to be three separate individuals, and now those can all be the same. Districts still should use best, judgment and practice to determine if we want to separate those out. But at a building level, that will likely make things easier if our principals and assistant principals can be both the investigator and the decision maker. Another change that is actually very helpful is that of supportive measures. So previously, the regulations had no language addressing any specific needs for special education students. Something that came up quite a bit in the last few years was that students who receive special education services by way of an IEP or 504 plan and were part of a Title IX investigation may have needed some types of accommodations and weren't receiving them. The regulations now make absolutely clear that if a student does receive special education services, the Title IX coordinator does need to consult with members of that student's team to determine any accommodations that they may be entitled to during an investigation process. Another sort of change for all staff is that previously the district was only obligated to move forward with a Title IX investigation if it had what was called actual knowledge of conduct that could violate the policy, and again would be sex-based or sexual harassment. That really required individuals to fully disclose a matter and was more than just overhearing something. Now, any employee that is made aware of any allegations that could reasonably constitute sex discrimination are obligated to contact the Title IX coordinator, with the exception of confidential employees like counselors, nurses, but there is another mechanism that they do need to support students in going to the Title IX coordinator. Another change is that previously complainants had to be presently participating in the district's educational program or activity in order to avail themselves to a Title IX investigation. Now complainants are able to file complaints and bring about allegations after they have left the employment, volunteer, or education program of the district. However, respondents still need to be currently participating as an employee, volunteer, or student, because otherwise, there's limited ability for the district to take, responsive action unless the respondent's currently enrolled. Another change, and this more affects sort of middle school, high school level, is that previously districts could not investigate off-school conduct unless it was school-sponsored, and if it had taken place outside the U.S., like a international field trip, if something happened there, we couldn't do anything with that. Now, the district does have the ability to investigate when contributing to a hostile environment. So any type of sexual harassment, assault, discrimination occurring outside of the school day that's creating a hostile environment for students in school, that is something that we can look into in partnership with the SRO, depending on the nature of the allegations. Another sort of important change is that the previous regulations had very distinct timeframes for every step of the process. So you had to list out, I have 5 days to interview a complainant, 5 days to interview a respondent, another 5 days to do the remaining interviews, this many days to do X, Y, Z. Now we just have to set timeframes for the major stages of the investigation. So the actual investigation, which we've recommended, is 25 school days. I believe it's 15 days for the decision maker to mete out a decision. And then some other timeframes, I think the same for any type of appeal that is pursued. Another change is that previously Title IX didn't have anything in place really for pregnant or parenting students. Now, if the district is aware of a student who is pregnant, that student does need to receive information on how to contact the Title IX coordinator and receive information on reasonable accommodations that will enable their access to their education during their pregnancy. Lastly, and another sort of positive change that we see is questioning by parties. Previously, parties in an investigation could submit written questions to one another. This in practice was effectively like written cross-examination, so it had a bit of an impact on parties when this was occurring. Now this is no longer required, it is no longer part of the policy. However, parties still maintain the ability to review and respond to evidence gathered during the investigation, so they can issue that communication to the investigator, but there is no sort of complainant and respondent directed communications that are occurring. So those are the major changes that we're seeing in Title IX. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions, concerns that any of the committee members may have.
No questions? Okay. Very nice, thank you. Oh,
I just want to say, I'm afraid every morning when I open up the paper, I watch the news, what changes and regulations are going to be made. It was nice to read yesterday about, well, no, it wasn't nice that the Supreme Court blocked partial enforcement. So tomorrow's another day. But thank you for that presentation. It was very helpful.
Absolutely.
thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next item on the superintendent's report is actually a presentation from our friends, Chris and Caitlin from Revere High School. When we left school in June, there was still significant concern among the committee members around cell phones, attendance, and how the support teams were working. And so I asked Chris and Caitlin, who I know have been working very hard on all three of those topics, to just give a quick update before the new school year starts next week. Did you want me to pull that up here, or you, okay, okay.
Can you hear me? That's on? Okay. So Caitlin's passing out sort of just a quick one-pager that we pulled together for you of some of the things that we're focusing on across these three areas. So my hope was I could kind of talk through them with you briefly and then just give a chance to ask questions, have a dialogue about kind of what your questions are or concerns are. So if it's okay, I'll kind of start talking through. Dr. Kelly, you're welcome to pull it up if you want to.
Almost
if you
there.
don't want to, you don't have to.
I think it's up now. Paul? Yep, there we go.
Cool. So I'll start with cell phones. So it is our vision for this coming school year that we are, creating an environment where students, families, caregivers, teachers experience phone-free learning experiences while they're in class and doing school at Revere High School. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking through sort of like what are the day-to-day steps that our leadership team needs to take to be able to support teachers, have the classroom level strictness that they need to bring the policy that is written in on paper to life. And so it begins with sort of our whole school messaging, which is happening beginning this week, really kind of explaining our rationale to sort of like, not just like what the policy is, but kind of the developmental impacts of kids being so addicted to phones. And so we're kind of pushing that out. We are creating slides for teachers to be able to have consistent messaging to students in class. We are having grade level assemblies on the first day of school, so sort of teachers aren't the ones carrying the burden of making sure that attendance policy and cell phone policy and that stuff is, we want to be the ones that are the first leaders and speakers of that. We have purchased lock boxes for each classroom so that teachers are able to securely store phones that they're confiscating following the process that we've outlined. I think a lot of times students have resistance or conflict comes in place when students feel that their phone's going to get taken. And we have had instances of like phones being on the back of the door, you know, all docked up, and then somebody takes someone and we spend 2 hours trying to find the stolen phone. So we're trying to kind of find ways to securely store those in classes. So we've got those ordered. Those should be in before the first day of school. Same thing for at the grade level or at the assistant principal level, kind of ways for them to store those securely. We have a sort of more all hands on deck approach in terms of our administrative team's response to teachers reaching out for support in the moment. We are also trying to provide teachers sort of with language to use, if they so choose, to kind of give them guidance on how to like hold the line with students and kind of so that all students are experiencing consistent messaging when they are not engaging with that cell phone policy. And then as our policy has, we have a sort of a 10-day phone docking in the AP's office by the second time it gets to the assistant principal. And so that is sort of our the result of thinking that we've done with teachers, with our administrative team of like what's doable, what needs improvement from last year, to be able to support teachers in having that classroom level strictness kind of across the board. So I can keep going, or I can kind of pause for questions on cell phones. And so I don't know what you'd prefer. Yeah.
What does the all hands on deck look like?
So the idea is we have a few different like ways that teachers communicate with our administrative team. We have an email listserv. It's called RHS Admin, and it basically goes to all 8 administrators in addition to all administrative assistants, so operations assistants. We discourage people to use that for emergency situations, but for outreach for support on things like I have a student who I'm trying to get the phone from and they're not playing. Like we don't want teachers to have to like fight with kids and stop the lesson and do all of that in class. The idea is just send an email to RHS Admin. We're all ironically on our phone, so we need to figure out how we navigate that. But we have administrative assistants who are monitoring that and will let us know, room 209 needs support on a cell phone, and then kind of it doesn't matter who the student is or who their AP is, just whichever administrator is closest and available to do that. And I think the all hands on deck piece is that like this is implementation of this is going to be the thing that we focus on, and that just requires us to kind of make sure we have somebody available at all times, at least in the beginning of the year, to be able to respond to what we anticipate is increased conflict, or I'll say lack of understanding of students, like kind of like why we're doing that. So that's one way that manifests.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the admins leading the charge on this.
Yeah.
One, because it puts in the student's mind that the teachers are just following what they're supposed to do.
Right.
So it's like somebody has to be the bad guy, right? It goes to the bad manager. Some adult has to be the bad guy. So if it has to fall on you, I think it makes for a much easier communication between teacher and student.
Right.
They think that it's your fault.
Exactly. Yeah, Mr. Kingston.
Mr. Kingston. Denise Matera, Tony Matera's wife, had given me his notebook.
Yeah.
And one of the things in his notebook was cell phone policy, and it did stress that taking the teacher out of the equation as much as possible and kind of put it on the admin. So I'm really happy to see this. I'm also happy to see this list. I wish you the best of luck. I think it's a great, it's a great list, and I'm happy to see it. And I mean that. I wish you the best of luck. I know it's going to be a challenge, but I think meeting with them in assembly, in a group, that was another thing that Mr. Matera had in his notes. He left me quite a few notes, but that was another one. Having the admins, kind of intervene on that, so that, like you said, it doesn't disturb the lesson and the rest of the class.
Yeah.
And having an assembly, those were 2 of the things that he had for cell phone policies, and a couple of others that you've mentioned here. So I think it's great. Tony taught for 30 years, knows a lot more about teaching than I do, and for him to say those things and you to say those things, it puts me in a good place. So I appreciate the effort and thank you.
Of course.
Mr. Caggiano?
How often, are you going to be sitting down with, when you say assembly, with parents as well as students about the new policy that we're going to be doing?
Yeah, so students we have planned for the first day of school. So every grade level will be brought down for sort of like opening day items, and these are items that you're looking at are on that. We have messaging going out to families about this. We've had open forums for that last year.
Right.
Can continue to do that. I don't anticipate wide-scale resistance from families on that. I think families struggle with kids and their phones as much as we do, but we'll definitely create space for families to kind of partner with us sort of more, I'd hope, on the like developmental aspects of why
Right.
cell phones and app obsession and smartphones and all of that is problematic. Sort of more from like an adolescent public health perspective than a policy perspective is sort of our plan.
But is that going to be like a continuation constantly? Because, we haven't done it, and now we're going forward, so we need to increase education as well as be consistent in our policies. Now, what happens when students basically won't refuse?
Yeah, I mean, that is the story of being a high school administrator, right? That we're dealing with students who refuse to do things all the time. So I think 85% of students are going to do whatever we're asking them to do if we're consistently implementing the policy.
Right.
And 15% or some variation
Right.
of that, we need to figure out what to do and plan with, problem solve with them and their families. And so I think the approach is the bigger picture messaging for everybody, and then
Absolutely.
problem solve on a
Absolutely.
smaller scale.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Did you want to say something, Ms. Kelly?
No, I was
I-
going to roll this on to the next.
If I can just compliment too, because one of the things that you mentioned was the consistent messaging,
Mm-hmm.
but the continuity between yourself and Miss Riley in the building, and now you're on 3?
Year 3, yeah.
Year 3,
We're starting
and
year 3.
it's also then been that gradual change of, we know that there was a lot of discourse 4 years ago on the first return, and it's it has steadily gotten better, but it's been with consistent policies, reiterating the messaging and the continuity of the two of you. I mean, I come through the halls, and you're very active, you're very engaged, you're all over the place. I mean, sometimes you're playing teacher, sometimes you're playing security guard, and sometimes you're playing in between, or you're playing parent.
Yeah.
You got other assistant superintendents that are also supporting you that have literally taken themselves down because you do care. So I see it progressively getting better. I know it's still away from where we all want it to be, but we're always striving for perfection, and I think a lot of it has to do with the two of you, so good job.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Ms. Rizzo.
So this will be part of the handbook.
So what is on paper in the handbook is exactly the same as it was last year. I think the struggle with last year was the way that we implemented that, right? So I think the level of nuance of like how a teacher implements that, I don't think belongs in a student handbook. That is kind of the back end of how we operate as adults, right?
Okay.
The policy is the policy, which is what you guys set and what is written into
Exactly.
our handbook. The work we do with teachers is just more kind of like, what's the step by step?
The second thing is, with Tony's family over the weekend, discussed how adamant he was about something being implemented. And I said, being strong like Tony, I am going to make sure something happens, and there's many on this committee that will follow through too. So I'm sure he would have been very happy with this. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Snella.
I think it's nice to have been the bad guy as an assistant principal, and it's nice to take it away from the teachers because of the fact is that they, wrong one?
No, you're fine, it's not working.
Oh, all right. But it helps with the administration end of it because no one wants to be the bad guy, whether it's a parent or whatever. But you can't pick up the newspaper or watch the news. This is almost nationwide. It's taking what became a thorn in somebody's side. It's now front and center, and it's rewarding that we're in the forefront. We're catching the wave, and it's comforting to know. But it'd be interesting to see how it progresses and the ups, the downs. Congratulations to you and your staff. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Transitioning to next topic.
Yes.
So when we think about our attendance policy, our vision for the school is that we have a culture where people, students, caregivers, teachers see being on time, being on program is essential to what it means to be on track to a successful high school experience. And sort of we did a lot of work with faculty last year towards the end, from April vacation till June. We had some working groups of faculty, and one of them, we really dug into attendance and like what are the different roles and responsibilities of teachers, engagement coordinators, family liaisons, the operations assistants, the administrators, what is everyone's role in implementing the attendance policy, communicating it, and so forth. And so we basically came up with 3 outcomes that we're working towards implementing this year. The first is that we have these defined role-specific responsibilities for improving attendance at the high school. The second is that we have a more thorough truancy prevention program specifically for students who aren't coming to school or aren't coming to school consistently on a daily basis, and that we have a better way to kind of consistently systematize what's happening in terms of what kind of I refer to as in-school truancy, students who are in school but skipping a class or going late, to think about the way that we can increase the amount of on-program behaviors that we see. And so I just kind of want to do an overview of some of what we're doing with that. So we're this week launching sort of some whole community messaging around September is actually Attendance Awareness Month. I'm not sure if you are aware of that, but September as a return to school is Attendance Awareness Month. And so we're really trying to focus on some of the research on how to get families involved in knowing their students' attendance status relative to their peers. There's a lot of research out there that shows that when families are told that Diane has been absent this many days, it's this percentage, and that's actually twice as much or 3 times as much or 4 times as much as the average student at the high school, that simple communication actually really increases families' kind of handle on their students' attendance. So we've got those blasts kind of teed up and ready to go out to families. We're trying to stagger that communication. Yeah, it is actually, that is the exact, there's an article in the Globe this weekend, I don't know if you saw it, but they kind of reference that specifically. Yeah, exactly. And so those kind of nudge letters, we call them, are sent out, as well as kind of caregiver awareness campaigns, something to the effect of, missing 2 full school days over the course of a month sets a student up to be significantly off track from graduation in a way that parents don't realize because it's just 2 days. And so that kind of bigger picture awareness, going down to really redefining what we mean by excused and unexcused absences, that I think since COVID has been sort of a thing of the past, and sort of really making sure that families are aware. Just because you call in and say, Caitlin's not coming to school today, doesn't mean that it's an excused absence. And so I'm pulling that there. We have some systems that we're putting in place for kind of reinstituting attendance points. So when students are off program, when students are late to class, when students are late to school, there's an accrual of points that they earn that will kind of put them in a spot where, one, they sort of are owing time that they need to make up assignments that are missed in that setting, as well as kind of who is sort of in good standing and what that means. Can you practice? Can you play? Can you attend clubs? Can you participate in kind of school activities if you're not in good standing in terms of attendance? And so kind of bringing back sort of a more kind of that tangible impact of missing school or missing class time, having better kind of consequence role clarity on what is the teacher's job to maybe ask a kid to stay after school because they came late to class versus the assistant principal and their team's role of following up with students who skip entire classes or there's bigger patterns, and kind of just all of those things were happening in pockets, but not in a coordinated way where it's like, this is what the teacher does, this is what the AP does, this is what their team does, and figuring that out. So we've hashed all of that out sort of in the spring, shared it with faculty at our last principals meeting for some feedback on that, and we're kind of going to kick off the year with that. And I'm going to kind of jump to the next one, and then I'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Just kind of updating on our support team structure. It is really our desire that the people in our school community, students, teachers, caregivers, and administrators, experience our support team process as a way that we can leverage relationships, that we can collaboratively problem solve to support students when they're in trouble, so that they can kind of demonstrate the resilience that we know our kids have. We did a lot of work last year taking, what I'd like to point out is we had 240 support teams prior to last year. We had 5 assistant principals, there were 8 guidance counselors, there were 7 school social workers. Each of those had if you do the math, there's 240 configurations of the way that adults worked with each other. We have 5 now. And so I think the work of last year, where we have, just kind of update you on some of the things we've done, we have weekly support team meetings. Every assistant principal and their team meets for the entirety of period 2, 1 day a week, to both kind of talk about the whole cohort and do individual case conferencing and support planning. We bring the parent in, bring the kid in, bring teachers in, and we kind of were playing around with building our processes last year. So last year was sort of a year of doing and also designing. One of the things we heard from teachers was that they want more consistency across those teams, right? They want certain things that are what I call public facing to be the same across the 5 assistant principals teams, and there's certain things behind the scenes that people can do their own way, right? And so we kind of have gotten clear over the course of last year what those things are. We've had a variety of professional development series for APs and their support teams. We've had 40 kind of individualized coaching sessions with our colleagues at Boston College that you all have supported to come in and observe support team meetings, give APs feedback on our referral process, on our action planning, on our follow-up. And so we've kind of spent a lot of time developing our handbook for student support and have kind of tested that out and gotten feedback on that, and we're sort of ready to like launch, right? And when I think about this year, my hope is that if we think about last year going from 240 configurations to 5, my hope is that this year we're going from these 5 support teams to really functioning with like one support team process. And I think when I reflect on my leadership of this last year, I think one thing I had wish I had done at the beginning of the year was sort of set people's expectations better for the fact that this is deeper work. We're changing how people work together, based compared to how they've worked together independently for years. And so there's sort of a growth experience of those teams working together that we're really kind of hoping to see the benefits of this year in terms of those consistent processes. So we work with teachers to develop routines for how faculty request support on different things when they need to collaborate with different concerns they have, and that's consistent across the school. That we have a more robust student action planning or student support plan process of like making the action plan for kids and sharing it with faculty and implementing it so everyone knows what different goals kids are working on when they're on a support plan. And increasing the range of supports, particularly for like social emotional supports and engagement supports that teachers can reach out to support the support team members on. So kind of giving teachers a list of, if you're struggling with these things, these are some classroom level interventions that you might try. If that's not working, these are some support team level interventions you might want to make a referral for and reach out to. And this is the right person. These are the things for the social worker. These are the things for the counselor. This is assistant principal and so forth. And we've kind of flushed that out with teachers. So these two go hand in hand. I think we can't think about attendance without student support. So.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yes, I think one quick question is for the attendance
Mm-hmm.
and outcome 3, are you all, maybe exploring, I know it's worked for some schools in Boston, is hiring hall monitors where it's like a part-time position, they're just more adult bodies in the hallways to help with the skipping and being out of class.
Yeah, so I feel very strongly supported in that. We have that. I think what we're working on is sort of the routines of how those hall monitors better collaborate with assistant principals, with our team, and then like what's the follow-up when it's the 3rd, 4th, 5th time the student is doing the same thing.
And just for clarification, those are the campus supervisors that we were talking about earlier, that the middle schools are now looking at how it's working at the high school and thinking we want that too.
Yes, anyone else? Nope. Okay.
Can I make one
You
last
may.
point in closing? I think a misconception, I think people are often set on the fact that there's not a failure due to attendance means there's no absent policy. And like we have an attendance policy, right? There are implications for missing class, there are natural consequences and sort of school developed consequences for those that we are putting in place, whether it's detention or whether it's kind of this idea of being in good standing or not. And I think that it'd be helpful for us as a school if we as adults can kind of get on board on the same page that there is an attendance policy. It says that kids need to be in school, needs to be in class, and that there's consequences and responses when they're not. I think it is somewhat detrimental to our efforts when the talk is that there's no attendance policy. I think that looks different places, and we're working to kind of have that communicated well. And I think if kids get the same message from teachers, from us, from their family, from you all, from the community, that there is an attendance policy, this is what it is, and this is how we're following it, like, I think that is very helpful. And so I'd ask your support on that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Good luck next week.
Get some rest.
I know, right?
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, the last thing on the superintendent's report was I just wanted to make sure that the public at large, I know the committee is aware, but that folks at home are aware that we updated our website, and hopefully you've all had a chance to check it out. I think it's much better than it used to be. We've updated all the school pages as well, and we'll be continuing to update and add new content as we go forward. But that's at reverek12.org if anybody wants to go check that out and find some great information there.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sinella?
through you to the superintendent. Diane, what's being done with cell phones in the middle schools, and anything in place, or wait
Yeah,
to see
so-
how this works?
No, we actually talked about cell phones in the middle school, and it's much less of a problem there. The kids are much more compliant with not having their cell phones out than what we experienced at the high school. So the administration at the middle school level feels they have that well in hand.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, anyone else? No, okay. Next on the hearings, we have none. And then subcommittee reports.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Sinella?
Thank you. The Subcommittee on Plant and Maintenance met on July 29th. In attendance were members Stacy Rizzo, John Kingston, and Alicia also came to the meeting. The issues that we discussed, as was mentioned at the Committee of the Whole with the flip locks, and it was interesting that apparently the parent company was unaware of apparently state law that you can't have two locks on the same door, and that we're, as the superintendent made reference to, it only works on round doorknobs, not the levers. So there's going to be an expense coming forth. The Lincoln School has to be changed over, and part of the high school. So it was a very informative meeting to be able to go and see them in action and to see how it works. It helps the comfort zone. So I think that the assistant superintendent has to be commended, because I didn't know anything about this, but that doesn't mean anything. But the way normally when it breaks down, it just collapsed, but this was picked up and the continuum is well on. And even when the new high school's built, the middle school will have access to this technology. So that was very enlightening. The other thing that we did discuss was the space, the possibility of portable classrooms, which is on everyone's mind as to how, what, when, and where. The superintendent made it a point of specifying that in-house is trying to work out to have adequate accessibility, even the school committee room. I had made a discussion where Rite Aid is vacant, the possibility of close proximity to the high school, the possibility of classroom. The superintendent mentioned different aspects would make it a little difficult, but mentioned the possibility of the administration offices going over, which would free up space that are now taken by the administration. We also mentioned that the possibility of space for the city, instead of having satellite places, a storefront here or something there, maybe the space could be split. It's plenty of parking, it's level, so this was just something that we offered as a possibility to approach the crowdedness at the high school. Of interest also was the update of the Hill School with the air conditioning, and the Director of Plant Maintenance assured us that it was well underway, that it had to have been customized to activate, so that there's a time slot, but it's been activated. And now with the school starting and everything else, hopefully the weather will be more cooperative. But these were three issues that were very well received, and the debate flowed. Stacy, who else was there? There was...
Oh, Mr. Jacob.
Oh, he volunteered to come in, and he did some figure in square footage and all that jazz, so gave more insight as to what is needed and how we're going to get it on that end of it. Of interest was addressing Director of Plant Maintenance was the episode at school committee meeting, apparently RTA was concerned with problems of rodents. And as soon as it was mentioned, Director of Plant Maintenance stepped right up and mentioned, as soon as it's said, they have traps, they have glue, they're right on top of it. Those of us citywide know that the city has a program with rodent control. And upon further investigation, apparently a couple of members did make reference of seeing not mice, but rats. And when questioned further, neither one of them have seen it. They were told about it. So that the more discussion we had, the better it kind of played out, so that the general public does not think that the Pied Piper's coming to town to rid us of rodents. So it's well under control. The people are doing the job they're expected to do, and I think that they're to be commended on it also. So we found it to be a very productive meeting on 4 counts, and the issue, I guess, what I'd want to let the committee understand as a whole, that it doesn't look as though it's feasible for portable housing due, number one, the cost, which is astronomical, but is procuring, as someone mentioned earlier with the buses, they're not available. So this is the same thing here, and if you order them, by the time you get them, the school's going to be half-built and things are going to be on that end of it. So the superintendent and her staff are looking for in-house, the superintendent through the mayor, possibility of Rite Aid, to see if there's something that would be there. I know plant maintenance would love to see it. I guess there would be an asset, but again, we can't buy, we can't appropriate. So if there's any questions or anything that I may have left out, I would appreciate any input, but it was a very productive meeting. Alicia?
Sure, I would just add, with respect to the issue of rodents, the reminder that if somebody does see something, they should report it, because I recall upon investigation into some of those instances where individuals alleged to have seen something, they had not reported it. So that's the only thing I would add to everything that you reiterated from the meeting.
Well, I think that's what Kyle mentioned more than once. Yes. As soon as they're notified, immediately, it's not, we'll get to it tomorrow. But it's also been noted through episodes within the classrooms themselves who missed the basket, and I'm not talking students, who missed the basket, who did this, on more than one occasion. They were surprised to come in and find, So I think that it's like anything else. If everyone works at it, then it shouldn't be a problem. If there is a problem, it can be addressed. Stacy, would you like to add anything to it, or
No, thank you for having the meeting.
Mr. Kingston?
Did a good job.
But I thank you people for, it was something that had to be said, something that had to be discussed, and it was done beautifully, aside from me and my big mouth, but that's neither here nor there. But thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, on the subcommittee report. One thing, and I think you had a productive meeting, which was nice, and I appreciate your words. Just not to throw any cold water on the theory, the city is not going to be purchasing Rite Aid. I hate to break it to everyone. We just don't have the resources. And just so everyone knows in the viewing public, is we're not really buyers of real estate. We took on a pretty big nut when it comes to taking on a large sum of land to build the future high school. That is going to contain us for the next number of years on top of the other projects. It would be nice if we had the ability to and we had the riches, but certainly not. Rite Aid's a private space, and we hope to see future retail and commercial space over there, and that complements our community.
Patrick, and just, it was never implied to purchase the rental. If they were looking to rent, for all we needed is a short period of time.
Right.
It kind of took a life of its own. Why not
it did.
buy it? So,
Everything does. Not because of you, but everything takes on a life of its own, as we know, and that's how communication goes these days. But I was already taking measurements. It's probably best served for a great retail space.
Thank you very much.
Hey, listen, no stone unturned, and it's always good to think and discuss. But I just wanted to clarify, we ain't buying Rite Aid. Thank you. Okay. The next item, any other subcommittee reports? Ms. Rizzo.
Thank you. Health and Special Education Subcommittee met at the Hill School on June 17th. In attendance was Aisha Milbury Ellis and myself. And also in attendance was Dr. Galucci, Director of Comprehensive Health Jill Herwig, and also our school nurse from Garfield Middle, Jessica Gagnon, and our Hill School nurse, Connie Gannon, was in attendance. And it was an opportunity to discuss on enhancing the comprehensive health department. We've had trouble for many years with school nursing, keeping them. We even tried going out and having the city nurses work here. Even that was not working out. City nurses start off with a higher salary, even though our school nurses may reach a higher salary later on. It's a little bit easier for them to get more. But our goal, we spoke about our goals for that, and we talked about maybe starting them off at a step 3 and to honor the years of experience. Also, to keep in mind, DPH recommends a school nurse to student ratio, full-time professional school nurse with 250 to 500 students, and that's a recommendation. I'm not saying it's a mandate, it's a recommendation. But we were all in agreement that we should probably start at having 14 and a half nurses within the city, even though we need to eventually overshoot that number down the road. And many times, we have a float nurse, but that nurse is used to cover all the absences, which last year was extremely a large amount. So our goal there was to try to reestablish the pay. Our Revere Public Schools nurses is paid $140 a day, whereas if you go to Malden, it's $240, Braintree $260, and good old Boston at $500. So need to relook at those things. We also looked into a permanent sub for a nurse. We have them for each school for teachers, and perhaps with a permanent nurse sub that will help with the absentees, and when there's no one out, they can help with doing the BMI screenings, the hearing and vision screenings. There's many things that they could be helpful with. We also discussed an agency to cover for an extended leave, and Jill Herwig was looking into that. And we talked about the PIC part-time nurse and if it's being utilized properly, because that person is being used for the administrative work, paperwork. And the importance right now is having full-time nurses in all our Revere schools. Also, we talked about field trips, and the goals are to have a nurse should be and must be in attendance at all school field trips. Field trips forms must be submitted within the guidelines set forward by our educators that would like to go on these field trips, and there should be no excuses. We also discussed back in the COVID days about there was supposed to be a second Hill School nurse, and I had Dr. Galucci and I were going to try to look it up, and when I did find it in the minutes, and then just this morning I got the video of it because I had no notes, and it does state a second nurse for the Hill School. And I realize a lot of times that second nurse is being used as a float to cover absentee, but that's not helping the situation at Hill School. That principal put in back in 2021 to add a school nurse. She felt there was a big need for it, and I respect that, somehow we need to look at how we can rectify it. We're adding, we talk about the money and carry forward and stuff, but we need to help this department. I believe. I do have a warm spot in my heart for it. I'm not going to lie, but more importantly, it's about the students. And, you know, especially like field trips, you can't send an educator on a field trip to give an EpiPen. I mean, some people might think it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. It's a life-threatening illness. So we can't send an educator that has no training whatsoever. And we also have to remember, anyone that's going on these field trips, if they're not the nurse, they're working off the nurse's license. And that's not fair to them. So hopefully with some of these goals, and Dr. Galucci can have conversations with Dr. Kelly, we can build this department to make it stronger.
And that one right there, Mrs. Rizzo, is a little bit tricky because we often have parents who will volunteer to go with their child if they
Right.
have a significant health concern. Or we have parents who happen to be nurses who volunteer to go on the trip. And in those cases, I think saying that you have to have a school nurse there puts an additional burden on the district. Because if we're sending our school nurses out on all the field trips, then it just adds to the point of we don't have enough nurses covering. And the nurse that you're talking about, the second position at the Hill School, we did want to put that second nurse there and said that they would float when somebody was absent. We never imagined that there'd be the level of absenteeism that we've seen since COVID. And so you're absolutely right. We thought that person was mostly going to be at the Hill and sometimes would travel. And the reason we thought that nurse would travel, as opposed to the other schools that have multiple nurses, like the Garfield complex has 2 nurses, but there are over 1,200 kids in that building. So the Hill School is large, there's over 600 kids, but we would pull a second nurse from there to make sure a school was covered before we would pull a second nurse from the Garfield. Or because of similar class size, the second nurse from the West Revere complex. Or even here at the high school, we have 3 nurses. But there's 2,100 kids up here. We need the 3 nurses up here, you know? So those are the kinds of decisions that we've been making in addition to having the float nurse. And I'll have to look into the situation at the PIC. I know that it was helpful to the nurses to have somebody there who could check the medical records of new students as they come in. And there are times when there are not a lot of new students coming in, and so that nurse is doing other kinds of paperwork because we're going to make sure that all of our employees are used to the fullest. So we could eliminate that position, but it would mean that our school nurses would have to go back to checking all those records like they used to. It used to be that the child's record went to the school they were getting assigned to, and then that nurse would have to check those medical records before the child was actually admitted. And having the nurse at the PIC to check those records expedited the student enrollment, which meant they were in school sooner, but also alleviated the responsibility of the nurses in the building where the child was being assigned to. So I just would say that we should think a little bit more about that role. It is a part-time position because we know that it's only certain times a year where enrollments peak, and we need that kind of help and support. So I'll just leave it at that.
So I just want to add one more thing. As far as when I checked the videos, I checked the minutes, we never said or agreed on this person being the float, the second nurse at Hill School.
That was in addition to, we already had the float nurse.
We had a
This was
float
a
nurse.
second
The second
person.
nurse for Hill School was never discussed to be used for
Right.
substitute nursing. It was
Right.
a second nurse for Hill School, period.
Agreed. The challenge is when we have a lot of people out, we can't leave a school with no nurse.
Absolutely. And that's why we also talked about having, such as the permanent sub, maybe we can get a permanent sub as far as nursing goes. And the other thing, as far as a parent going with their student, that was always the best case
Yeah.
scenario, always. But there was so many times that students weren't allowed to go because their parent couldn't go. And you don't want to take that away from the students
Never,
either.
ever has a child been denied a field trip because they had a medical condition.
We've had students, maybe not in the past 10 years, why I haven't been in the schools,
Okay.
but we've had students stay back at the school because we couldn't send a nurse with them or their parent couldn't go. And no one should have to.
Correct.
No one should be
100%.
deprived.
Yeah, we would never, I know in my tenure, we've not done that because that would be a violation of that child's rights.
Right.
That's discrimination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mr. Kingston?
I'm not sure, but it's something I've thought about before. Could a firefighter EMT go on a field trip if we paid them? It would help with the nursing shortage, I would think. Maybe that's something we need to look into.
We
Just a
would
thought.
also have to check if they're working under the school license, nurse's license, just to make sure, and that would be something we could ask the attorneys.
Just a thought to give us some extra bodies, because
Yeah, well, one of the things is we're not required by law to have a licensed medical provider on a field trip. We are required to have have a person who's allowed to administer medication for students who have long-term medical issues like diabetes, or if they need to have an EpiPen administered, if they have allergies, things like that, we are required to have somebody with them. It could be a health aide, which we don't have health aides anymore. It can be the child's parent. It can be a licensed nurse who doesn't work for us. It could be an EMT who is certified to administer those things. But, you know, we can definitely think more about whether or not we have the capacity already in the district and what capacity we need to add to make that happen.
Ms. Kelly, and much like Mr. Kingston mentioned, I was going to say the same thing, is a lot like we didn't have paraprofessionals 30 years ago. We had teacher aides, we had parent helpers, and now we've professionalized a little bit more. But the real reason is because you need more bodies and people that can support the students, and sometimes one teacher in a room isn't enough. So in a school, let's just say the high school, if there's 3 nurses, if we did have a health aide or some form of an EMT to subsidize or supplant the 3 nurses, we all know that not every time a student's being seen is a serious medical condition, although you want to have the trained personnel, but a lot of times it's a knee scrape, it's a stomach ache, a fever, which I'm not, I said, we all know that we would not say disregarding the need for nurses in schools, but if you took the 100% of the calls, the needs, you'd probably find that more than 50% of them were things like knee scrapes, right? My kids went to schools, in Revere schools for 12 years, they never had a serious health issue, but they were seen by many nurses, falls, scrapes, the same reason at our athletic fields, where there's lots of room for serious medical needs, we have an EMT or a trainer on staff, So I'm just saying that Mr. Kingston brought up a really good idea, I think would probably be something that could be helped to subsidize the need and the shortage that we see in the nursing field. My niece is a nurse in school, and I say, come work for the Revere school. She goes, doesn't pay enough, no thanks. I'm gonna go make $120,000 a year at a hospital. Rightfully so. Thank you. Ms. Monterosso.
As we're exploring options, I like the idea of a permanent substitute nurse more, just because in addition to the qualifications and the licenses to be a school nurse, they also have the training of working with students and having that extra step there. And we're also not taking away from other first responders that are always very much needed in other areas outside of schools. So I'd like to continue the conversation about a permanent sub, seeing what those numbers look like with Matt, and then if we also need to have the conversation about possibly increasing salary so it is competitive, seeing what that looks like. I met a new teacher at orientation whose wife wanted to also be a nurse here, but Saugus pays her way more. So now he's working here and she's working in Saugus. So I think we all have enough examples of that warrant that further exploration in the budget.
Mr. Kingston?
I didn't mean for the firefighter to replace a nurse. I just know that the difficult struggle in hiring nurses. So as a stopgap or a Band-Aid, whatever word you want to use, that's why I thought possibly a fire EMT could help. It's very difficult to hire nurses. And I don't know how, it's great to have a substitute, maybe we can talk about their salaries. But a lot of that's contractual, especially the nurses that are on the school side. The nurses on the city side, you have a little more flexibility. But I just thought the EMTs in the meantime, more to cover a field trip than actually in the school, but wherever we could use them. And I wasn't trying to take from the fire that would be maybe on their day off, that they would sign up to work to do a field trip, that type of scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Milbury?
Just to piggyback with what Ms. Monterosso had said, could we also, in this generalized discussion, look at health aides as well? I know that it may be maybe helpful to have some health aides. I think there were health aides that were employed right during COVID. We had COVID funding for that, and then
We had health technicians,
technicians.
and
I may be referring to the wrong name.
when we were getting ready to come back from remote learning, we hired a health technician to pair up with each nurse, so that if a nurse was dealing with a COVID situation, the health technician would be able to deal with the scraped knee or the headache or whatever the case may be, and that we could isolate folks away from somebody that maybe we were thinking had COVID. And we did pay for them through the ESSER funding. We did bring them into our budget, but as they moved on, we did not replace them. So we still do have a handful in the district. I think we have like 5 left. So we had, I think it was 14 to begin with. We've got like 5 left. And I know one thing that Dr. Galucci mentioned to me was really, and I think this might have come from the meeting that you all were at, was looking at where they are and how they're being used and whether or not they could be redeployed to better meet district needs where we have some deficits.
Okay.
And that was definitely a discussion on their training and reassessing where they might be needed. But they're still not medical personnel, that any medical, they'd be working under the nurse's license, which I know there are some people I would never want working under my license. But they're great for paperwork, hearing and vision, they can do hearing and vision. They can help out with many screenings.
Mr. Sinella?
Through you to the superintendent. Diane, point of information, is the Mass General still have a clinic here? They still do?
Yes.
Do they staff it, or are we staff?
No, they staff the clinic themselves, and they've been amazing, as they always have been. It's a great resource here at the high school.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good resource. Okay. Well, good discussion. Any other subcommittee reports? No? We close those. Next on, we have motions. A motion to approve the Revere Public Schools Employee Handbook. Do we have, pardon me?
Motion to approve.
We have a
Second.
Discussion?
No? Hearing none? We'll do the next one. It wasn't on my agenda. A roll call?
No.
Dr. McCabe?
Just to clarify, this is a roll call on the school employee handbook.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Okay. The second motion is the motion to approve the fiscal year 2025 RPS student activity accounts.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? None? All in favor?
Aye.
The next motion is motion to approve the guide to Revere Public Schools for students, parents, and caregivers.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None? All in favor?
Aye.
So ordered. And then we have unfinished business. I know there are a few items that were not discussed in the committee of the whole. Correct? Ms. Monterosso?
So the next 2 points were points I asked to put on the agenda. The first was discussion of the professional development for the school committee. And so I was just thinking how we had a session in the spring. We're planning one right now for the fall, but I think just to have continuous learning it would be really important if we set up some type of process or structure where we have kind of a fall retreat where we dive into the data from our schools, we plan our goals, and then in the spring, we would have another PD of just like 2 hours on a topic that we all need. And so I realized that we actually don't have a school committee policy for professional development for ourselves. So I wanted to raise that to you all, see what you thought, and then I'll make a motion to refer it to policies and procedures to further discuss it. So that was my first update there. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to refer the creation of a school committee PD policy to the Policies and Procedures Subcommittee. Do I have?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
So ordered.
And the next point was the creation of an onboarding handbook. So once I came in as vice chair, I started to kind of curate one so whoever's the next vice chair doesn't have to start from scratch on the new things that we do and kind of things I wish I knew when I became a school committee member. And then I realized that it might be helpful, instead of me just creating that as a resource myself, that we could create an onboarding handbook for new members. So I wanted to bring that to you all, and then if you like it, once I can just pass my ideas and the work I've already done to policies and procedures so we can build it and then hopefully have it for the next people that come on. Okay, great. So once I'll get all of that, and then I'll bring it to you all once I have it in writing.
Thank you. Okay. And any other unfinished business?
So the follow-up on the vocational conversation, I had emailed you all a copy of the survey that Taunton Public Schools sent out, and just bringing you back to the organization that's working to change the ways that students are accepted into the vocational technical programs, and hopefully get more seats developed across the state. Their ask was that we send a similar survey to our students who had applied to the VOC and did not get in, and then the family would choose whether they want to engage or not with that organization. And so the request last time we met was that I get a sample of that survey, and I sent that to everybody, and so I'm back to see what you think.
Ms.
So,
Rizzo?
Dr. Kelly, that was with, I believe, with the assistance of DESE?
I'm not sure about that. It's a nonprofit group comprised of members from a lot of different backgrounds.
No, I know
MBA,
that, but
yeah.
I thought they were working with DESE on this.
Oh, you mean legislatively? They were working with DESE to create new rules that then the
Exactly.
legislature would have to vote on, yeah.
Right.
If I may,
Mr. Kidger?
after the last meeting, I sat down with the administration to just go over the demographics. So they put something together for me I'll pass out. And basically, it breaks down the demographics of the VOC itself. And at the VOC, we do meet and exceed all the expectations, and we do have a 10% lottery rate. But if you see, is it been passed out? Everybody's been passed out? Okay. This is basically the enrollment breakdown of the vocational school. And the blue part is Revere High School, and the red part is Northeast. And if you notice, when we go through the different demographics, Latinos, we have much more at Northeast. There's probably like 60-something% at Revere High School and almost 80% at the VOC. The Revere High School has more whites than Northeast. As far as Afro-Americans, it's pretty much even. The Asian is more at Revere High, and as far as the other multi-ethnic groups, there's more a little at Northeast. I just feel, talking to a lot of parents who didn't make it in, I think this, like Mr. Sinella said at the last meeting, it just builds they think they have a chance. And right now, we do have the most students, but we don't think, we're not going to be able to have these people. We don't have the room. I mean, we do have the most students. And to build up their hopes, I just don't think is a good thing.
Thank you. Ms. Milbury Ellis?
Yeah, my thought on this is that while I'd like to support citywide initiatives that are in the best interest of students, I am concerned that I think that this survey, it may be suggestive and plant a seed that perhaps the reason why one student did not get accepted into our vocational school is because of these issues that are happening citywide. So I just think there might be some confusion there, or misleading, or provide an inference that that's the case, even if it's not, and that may cause more problems for us. Does that make sense? I mean, I just feel like it's something that I just would rather not touch. I just see some harm coming out of it within our district, rather than good. Godspeed to the rest of the state and their initiative. I just think it might be hurtful to us and plant a seed that there's discrimination where there's none. And that's the last thing that we need in this world, is more accusations, involving race.
Thank you. Any other members? No?
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes, Mr. Caggiano.
When we look at everything, even with the full lottery, we're still going to have almost 300 kids on the waiting list, regardless of a survey or if there's a lottery or not a lottery. I think we need to look at what can we do in Revere to help this. And I talked before, and I'll talk about it again, is like an after-dark program with Northeast. So these kids on the waiting list, there'll be less. We will be getting additional seating in 2026. How many seats? We will get the most, but we don't know yet. And also, too, is the perception of the parents is they're not getting, Northeast can provide a better academic than Revere High. And I think we need to change that perception, change everything.
I don't
Keep
believe
telling
that.
them that.
That I don't believe at all.
Yeah. How many of them went to Stanford University?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the perception of parents, because when they don't get in, I get the calls. And this year was a lot. And each year keeps getting more and more. I'm just saying is like you said, like the Stanford part, did we put it out there? I think we need to put out, I think John mentioned it before, our successes also. But the perception out there, from the parents who don't get in, not all of them, a lot of it is vocational education, but a lot of it is academics. And then maybe we can change that also.
Mr. Chairman?
Good points. I was going to counter some of that.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Mrs. Snell.
I'm just curious, has a motion been made?
No,
So this is
no,
only
just
discussion.
discussing.
Well, we should have a motion before we do any discussion, so I apologize for not bringing that up at the beginning. So I will make a motion to do the survey.
Motion to approve the survey.
Mhm.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
You can
Okay,
do
Oh,
discussion.
sorry, apologies.
Any more discussion?
Any further discussion?
I withdraw.
I'll just reiterate, Miss Aisha Ellis, Milbury Ellis, apologies, stated some opposition to that prior to the motion. And I think Mr. Caggiano did as well. But just kind of going back to when we were talking about the education, certainly the Northeast Voc is a very good school. And I think kids wanting to go there now, I love the fact that kids want to go to vocational schools now, as opposed to 20, 30 years ago, they were like, pushed into that school. So the tides have turned clearly from the workforce needs out there, and that's been really good. But when we stand one school up against another, a lot of times it's just, I think there's an environment that people think that they're getting. It is a smaller school. It's a smaller school, and it's in Wakefield. So, I mean, I'm not going to infer what it is, but it's a smaller school in a smaller city with a little bit more of a smaller town feel, and some people are going there for that. That doesn't, I think that's really not relative to the education, and I'm not suggesting you're implying that either, but I'll put the superiority of the Revere School education pretty much over all of our neighboring towns as well, not just our vocational schools. So outside of that, I think that I'll concur with Ms. Milbury Ellis's inclination that the survey probably is not necessary, especially with these stats. It's clear that the Northeast Vocational School is accepting students of many different races and backgrounds. That's my feeling. So, any other questions, comments, concerns? Roll call.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo.
Yes.
Mr. Caggiano.
No.
Mr. Kingston.
No.
Mrs. Milbury Ellis.
No.
Miss Monteroso.
No.
Mr. Sinella. Mayor Keefe.
No. Motion fails. Any other unfinished business? We're good? New business?
I know we've negotiated some of the contracts successfully, and I think that's great. My concern is for the folks that aren't under contract, that aren't in a union, such as the subs and other positions in the district that don't fall under any particular union. I was wondering when their time at the pie comes, I guess. Thank you.
So the subs are usually considered separately, but typically, when the school committee votes to approve the AFSCME contract, they also vote to extend the benefits afforded to the AFSCME employees to our non-contract employees. That usually happens the same night. I anticipate that AFSCME is going to have their ratification vote this week. And one of the things that we had talked about with Mr. Caggiano and Ms. Milbury Ellis was having a meeting, and I don't want to say an irregular meeting, but a special meeting. Thank you. I'm like, my brain's not working anymore today. But have a special meeting for the purpose of voting on that contract as soon as next week, once we get notification that AFSCME has ratified.
Thank you.
Then we could look at that meeting, and we could also vote for the non-contract employees.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Ms. Monteroso?
Yes, just one more update that didn't make it on the agenda. Last meeting, you all tasked the mayor and I with exploring the transition to City Hall. So I sent you all an email update that now we can discuss if anyone has questions. But the city council chambers are booked up for the rest of this calendar year. So the city clerk put a hold for whenever we meet starting next calendar year if folks want to move. So I just want to give you all an update as you asked, and then if folks have questions or if you all want to discuss this at the next COW, if it's happening or not, just want to pass it back to the full committee.
And just to further elaborate on that, so meaning January, the clerk feels confident that after January 1st, they can accommodate. It'll definitely be a good tight squeeze from the standpoint of the schedule of the weeks throughout the month. On top of that, if anyone, knows the city council chambers, right directly behind the city council chambers is a fairly large open space that goes towards the human resource office. We've just started the renovations to build out a fairly decent-sized conference room that would fit up to 20 attendees. So the good news is if we do shift over to this City Hall building, we can have subcommittee meetings or other meetings scheduled in the conference room that will be directly behind the city council chambers.
Oh, that's great. Great use of
Okay.
that space.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.